My name is Noelle. I'm the Director of Marketing and Events for the Graph, EduNode, and the House of Web3. We're really excited to have you all here today. The House of Web3 is a first of its kind co-creation space for those in Web3. So we welcome you to take a look at our website. You can go to edgeandnode.com and click on House of Web3 and request an invitation if you're interested in joining and co-creating here during the day. And we have tons of events here, 3 to 5 probably a week that we love to share. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Lisa, who put this amazing event together today.
Thank you, Noelle. Thanks, everyone, for coming to our second Art in Web3 event. Tonight, we're focused on generative art, and we have a great selection of speakers here to present to you tonight. We have Jordan Kantor from Art Blocks, and Carolina de Bartolo, who's an artist, Rob Dixon, who's also an artist, and Martin Grasser, who's also an artist. There's a couple other artists in the audience too, Jeff Palmer and Johan, and we're also showing Santiago's work. And then we also have Han from Deca, also known as bonafidehan, who will be speaking with Jordan in the second half of the talks this evening. I also wanted to thank Clar's Auction Gallery for sponsoring tonight. Where's Talisa? There's Talisa. Thank you so much for sponsoring this event tonight. And then the event will be recorded by exhibited.at. It's a local resident founder. Rodania is the founder of exhibited.at. So look out for that. So there's a gallery throughout the space, and there's 8 screens. So there's maps everywhere posted that you can see which art is where. And we have live minting in the entryway, as well as Martin Grasser's type generator to play around with. And there are POAPs too. So make sure you check out everything after. And with that, I will let Martin take it away. Thank you.
Well, I'll take it before Martin gets it.
Oh, sorry.
No problem. I'm Jordan Kantor. I'm the artistic director at Art Blocks, and thank you all for coming. And thank you, Lisa, and thank you to the House of Web3 for hosting this. We're delighted to have a community event that can focus on generative art and how the blockchain is supporting that and making it possible for us to kind of experience a new art form and see new things from the amazing creators here and in the room too. So thanks for your interest and for coming. My job as artistic director at Art Blocks is really to screen projects for release on the platform. They're all generative on-chain projects. I work with a committee that makes those decisions, and then we support the artists as they're in our ecosystem and developing their code and uploading that code onto the blockchain, and then we support their release. And then thereafter, we sort of advocate for them in the world and for this movement that we believe in. And one of my main approaches to that is to get out of the artist's way as much as possible. And that's basically the format that we're going to have tonight. We've asked each of these 3 artists to bring some images in, which we'll throw up on the screen, and then really just make space for them to talk about their practice, some of the projects that they've already released, what generative art means to them and how they're productively using the blockchain, and then maybe what they're working on and what's coming next. So the structure is each of them will have maybe about 10 or 15 minutes to go through a couple slides. I hope that at the end they would avail themselves to questions. If not, you can ask me questions and I'll try and answer them. But my technical knowledge is very low, so you can ask me aesthetic questions. And then we'll take a little break, and then for the second half, as Lisa said, we'll have a conversation with Han. So in the spirit of getting out of the artist's way, I have the clicker here, and I think we're going to start with Marty talking about and walking us through a couple projects. And just by way of framing it, can you just start by saying what generative art means to you and how we might see some of those interests in these images?
Generative art to me is about building systems. I think of design as like putting down a positive, like putting something exactly where you want it. And to me, generative design is about building a space in which interactions can happen and systems can happen. And so my job during the day is building corporate identity systems, which I love. I like seeing how things disseminate into the world. And so to me, this is my abstract version of that, where I talk in color or in shape, and I build a playground or a construct in which interactions happen and art comes out. And so this to me is like the simplest form because it's one shape. So it's a building upon of squares and talking in color. So the background is made up of 10 million squares to appear like sand. And then on top of that, I build a grid which fills with colors and interactions. And I feel like they're little conversations or colors talking. They're meant to be letter forms or sentences that build in Z space. They feel like monospace typography to me, color. And so I love the conversation between design and then where you're sort of giving something up to the system and then having to have that conversation back and forth, like working in code, working in an unknown output. And then at some point you have to say this is done, and you make 300, and then you have to kind of hate it for a few weeks and then learn to love it.
You have to talk.
Oh, sorry about that.
Can you hear him? Anybody who wants to speak up, say speak up. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Can you tell me what's the title of for the folks who don't know?
Squares.
What's the title of the project? What's the edition size? And
It's called Squares, and it literally is built on the idea of like, I'm a designer, so give me a restraint.
Mhm.
And so if all I have to do is fill a square with color and then build an interaction, I think these are pretty good in terms of that constraint. So there's 196 of them, so they can be displayed in a square because I want them to be available. Yeah. And I don't know what else to say. There's 30 color palettes, and it took 11 months to build this. And it started with a picture of my kids' toys magnetiles. So this was
nice.
floating a camera, taking a picture every 3 seconds, so almost generative photography, taking a picture over kids' magnetiles that created this blur of color. And then I started building lights and other like colors on top of that, and it started becoming an interesting little conversation. And then started build, they get more interesting as I think they build up.
I'll never unsee the magnetiles. Yeah, I love that. Great. And so here are just another couple examples. So the algorithm has some diversity of outputs. Were there any surprises when it was minting?
No, I think, the feedback I actually got was to add more diversity, but I loved the constraint. To me, I was really happy. I think 196 turned out to be a great size. And I think that there's just enough of each of them. And I think there's just enough like chunky ones and skinny ones and ones where parts of the image disappear. And this goes back to what I said. I think it's like anyone who makes art, or I guess makes anything, you make food and like you want to criticize, like, oh, what would I do different? And I think that when it came out, I don't know, you just kind of don't know how to react. Then you kind of learn to be like, I'm so appreciative of how this ended up. Because it's just like 45 minutes of a day, and people press a button and then you end up with art. It's really romantic or kind of cool. I love it. I don't know. And you're stuck with these, and then some people trade them for nothing. And I love the market. I think it's interesting to watch them get whipped around and stuff.
So I'm also like, I think it's part of my job, and excuse me if this is like too basic or something, but I always want to bring things down to a common denominator just so that we're all having the same conversation. So I feel like some operative definition is needed here for a second. So for this project, he uploads an algorithm that can run an output that he doesn't see in advance. Okay. So he uploads that code onto the blockchain. Then there's a bit of random information that comes in the process that's called minting. That random information then spits out a unique example, a provably unique example of the algorithm that he has never seen before. So the act of collaborating with the collector is part of the birth of the work of art itself. So this is fundamental to the way that on-chain generative work, at least at Art Blocks, exists. So there's a moment of mystery there. So when I'm asking about surprises that he saw, that's the kind of context for that, because the artist writes the algorithm and knows the general parameters of what can come out of that, but what actually comes out and is minted on the blockchain immutably forever is a mystery.
And I had no rarities.
Yes.
I don't build rarities in my art. So it's all meant to be like, I don't want anyone to feel like they got a worse one. I think that's so silly, yeah.
Okay, great. And tell us a little bit about this project.
Yeah, I'll be quicker on this one. So this was 8 days of tennis, and for the, let's see, what do I want to say? The ATP picked the 300 most interesting shots.
What is the ATP?
Is the Association of Tennis Professionals. So they have this big giant thing of data set. And they went through with some people at something called Tennis Data Viz and the marketing people there, and they picked the 300 most exciting shots. And we took Hawkeye technology, like when they look to see, like, is this ball in or out? So we said, we're going to take that, we're going to use a shadow and determine direction and velocity. And if you go down to the next slide real quick, we built a camera with 114 lenses on it. So anytime the ball landed, the algorithm would go through those camera lenses, and it's biasing towards a 2-line image. So if you go back up one, you can see it gets a little bit plain if it's one image, and most of them were like, a lot of them were coming back one image. So we had to build a camera that went up a little bit. And so our idea was basically like we built a court in code, and then we built a camera, and then we painted the court with a color and then like a texture on top of it to give it that little bit of movement, or same noise that's kind of in squares, but a little different. I love procedural noise. Every designer should. And then down, if we click down 1 and 2, I think we can see some of the outputs. So yeah, here's 3 that just show different angles. Again, the shadow. If these were live, you can hit A and it kind of animates out and shows you exactly where the ball was. One of the cooler things I saw was people putting like the point next to the piece of art that was like actually, oh, that's an ace, that was championship point or whatever. Somehow it's just like really satisfying to see that's art now. Like, oh, that's on a fluorescent pink court. It's cool. I don't know. There's something like really immediate and simple about it.
Wonderful. And just for context, also, like Art Blocks, when we release on what we call like the flagship product, it's art projects made by artists solely of their own initiative and at their own cost of doing that project. But their Art Blocks technology is also licensed through something called Engine, where we have partners who can commission artists to do projects. And so this is an example where the ATP and Marty came together to do a project that was commissioned using the same technology that these artists would use to launch a project on Art Blocks as an artwork.
Yeah,
So
this one's fully on chain, just like a Art Block script or whatever.
Right. Yep. Wonderful. Okay, great. Is there anything else that you want to add, or did you bring any more
to this
images
one?
in?
I brought one more. I think there's 2 more. Oh, maybe no,
next.
that's it. That's
Yeah,
it.
perfect.
That's my 2
Right on
presents.
time.
Hey.
Lots of interesting tidbits. Okay, thank you. That's amazing. Thank you, Marty. All right, so now let's look at some of Rob's work. Can you talk a little bit? I saw you nodding when he was sort of defining what generative art means to him, but is there anything that you wanted to kind of add about that?
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great start there. And just to build off that, I do look at generative art as kind of a new tool set for artists, in the sense of, it's not paints and it's not, pencils, but it's code that lets you kind of express yourself in a different way. And, the challenge being that it's not necessarily just one work you're creating, but you're creating a whole output space, a whole design space, not just one design. And you're trying to make it so that the rules that you're defining aren't going to have, I mean, the main thing I try to do is not have the bad quote unquote outputs, the broken ones. Though at the same time, you try to define that design space so that you can have unique things that you didn't anticipate. So that's the challenge, to have some kind of emergence and some unique outputs from this tool set, without ones that are just, black and nothing on them, that kind of stuff. And there have been plenty of things like that have come out in different projects. You know, there's just one that's just completely broken and can't be fixed. And so that to me is always, you know, the common denominator. Make sure there's pretty much just at least interesting stuff, and stuff that kind of gets your point across, gets the intent across.
You talk about code as a tool set. I mean, can you talk a little bit about how you learned to use this tool set, or how you became introduced to the creative coding or this space at all?
Sure. Yeah. I go back a long way as a software developer. So that's how I started. Been programming since I was like 13 years old, back in the early days. And I got into games, always had kind of a design sense. So I do early web design stuff, game development, had a game startup in the early 2000s, then .com bust. And so ended up at Macromedia on the Flash team eventually, and did a lot of sample apps and artwork with Flash. And so that was really, I would say, the start of the creative coding aspect. So I was given Flash and Flash Player and said, come up with cool stuff, show examples, push the envelope. Here's this new feature. Can you make something beautiful come out of this? And so I have a lot of those old experiments that were just at the time experiments. I didn't take it that far until I saw Art Blocks again years later. And I first learned about it, I think December 2020. And it all just like, I got that right away. This is the stuff like I used to do.
We have definitely found that there are many artists who have projects that they were working on 15 and 20 years ago in another context that are seeing a totally new application for that now, with these kind of on-chain works. And a lot of these old projects are coming out of the woodwork in many different fields, in gaming, in graphic design. We see architects who were using the software early on. And it's really fascinating to see all this kind of recast and reimagined as art. And can you tell us a little bit about this project here? Yeah.
Sure. So Inspirals was my first project on Art Blocks. So it was a curated first season, I guess it was called, or first series. And it did go back to some stuff I'd been experimenting with. So these start as kind of Escher style tiling of the plane, like repeated tiling of the plane. And then it uses a shader to kind of give it the spiral effect. So really what's happening in these particular ones is you have a flat plane that's tiled completely, and basically consider a spiral lens looking at that, and you're just moving the plane past the lens of this camera infinitely. So these do animate, and they go on as long as you want them to, and you can have them distort. It was one of the first animated ones that came out. So yeah, that project was a lot of fun. It kind of drew on, I also have an affinity for kind of comic book art, graphic style. And so that showed up a lot in these as well. My practice in general, I kind of want to have these things, well, two things. One, with generative art, I feel you should use the tool set in ways that would be hard to do manually. Like if you have this tool set, why not use it to kind of push something new out there that as a traditional artist, you would have a very hard time doing. And then the other is to have some kind of sense of wonder come out of this, like something that's going to, you're going to go like, wow, or, just space out on for a while, or something like that, that's kind of taking you to some other level, and hoping to get there.
What other images did you bring? Can I
go for it?
But can I just ask before, as we're switching to this, can you talk about what the kind of technical areas that you were pushing in these projects were? Like, how do you see them as technically innovative within the space of your practice?
So for Inspirals, it was that kind of first, one of the earliest animated generative works, and also one of the first to use shaders, actually. That's a shader that's using that. And with that, I did want it to be something that could evolve. So if you can start the animation on your screen and set it a certain way, it will just keep changing for a long time. And, it can just be something hanging out there. So I wanted to have that kind of effect, which is what isn't something I had done before. So push it there.
Awesome. And tell us about these projects.
Yeah. So Eccentrics was I decided to go back to the drawing board and do something different. So this actually came out of kind of web design. So Eccentrics, the basic algorithm here is that everything's inset a little bit. So it's padding and and margins. But it's padding and margins with a lot of randomness going on. And so you start with an outer shape, and then you do one that's just a little bit smaller and put it in there. And then next time you might do one that's smaller, or you might split it into two different ones that do them. And those might split, and then they might come out. And so it was actually a relatively simple algorithm that just started producing these really interesting results with different shapes and different kind of insets and things going on. And it was when the emergence started, mostly when, not so much in these, but some of these, like you can kind of see a little face in that one. And then these little eyes started coming out. And that became kind of the hallmark of these projects, was they were like the eccentric eyes. I think that's still the emote on the Art Blocks Discord, the eccentric eyes. And so some of them you really could see whole stories in them. You know, there was like one that looked like three nuns called the Spooky Sisters that people would post. Oh, look at this one. So that was a fun part of that project too.
Yeah, I think that's also something that's really interesting about all this is, like, to the one hand, you don't know what the outputs are going to look like.
Right.
And the other hand, they're immediately released into the wild, in the public eye. And so there's a very high community aspect of just kind of building conversations around what different people see in these works and all of that, you know, there's an opportunity for a kind of one-to-one connection between a maker and their audience that this space affords, that I think is quite unique. If you're an artist and you have a show and you have an opening, somebody might come up and say something to you at the opening, but they're inevitably going to be polite, and, you know, it's kind of going to be on the level of the platitudes. You don't really get like the kind of feedback actually that we see in our Discord channel, and you know, the kind of immediate quick read. And I think that's really part of, I would imagine, some of the excitement about, you know, releasing projects in this space.
It is. It's actually, as an artist, it gets pretty addictive after a while when you're actually developing these things and you're just hitting refresh over and over to see the latest one. You're like, oh man, or you tweak something and you're like, this is great, or suddenly this is not good. So go back. But you can sit there for hours. And I remember my wife and my kids would be with me sometimes standing behind, and we're all going, ooh, look at that one.
Yeah, there's a discovery process for everyone.
Yeah.
So I don't know, did you bring other images? Or
Yeah, there's a couple more. So this was a project I did after that, taking the same eccentrics algorithm and making a couple decks of cards out of them. So, and, you know, kind of leaning into the whole eyes thing.
Wonderful.
Which turned out pretty well. And those should be printed this year, so we'll actually have some playing cards to give out.
So cool.
And then my latest project is called Windwoven, and that's on Art Blocks Engine through the Proof Diamond Exhibition. So that was selected for the Diamond Exhibition there. And this is very different, but still in the vein of getting the computer to do things that would be super hard to do by hand. So, yeah, you know, Marty had millions of squares going on. These are millions of circles, actually, in these patterns. And when you get close, this is actually looks very tactile, looks very fuzzy, like you could touch this stuff. And so there is a print in the other room that you can check out just to see what the texture looks like. And so this was a lot of fun to do, and to come up with these kind of patterns and textures, almost in a textile kind of feeling, like fiber arts.
It's beautiful. I mean, there's so many limits that are part of this process. And one of the requirements actually for releasing on Art Blocks, or on Engine too, I think, is what we call like resolution agnosticism, which means that the works can scale up infinitely. And so it's I mean, the word million just like rolled off your tongue right there. But if we want to just sit with that for a minute, that can be blown up to any size and hold its resolution because of how the algorithm operates. So that's also something, there are kind of unimaginable translations of these things that we haven't even imagined yet that these algorithms can support and be output as. And prints is one of them, although all of them are, I would say, natively digital.
Yes.
Right. Wonderful. Well, before, I know you didn't bring a slide of this because I'm just springing it on you now, but I did want to just mention the charity component and the trees. And can you just tell us a little bit about that? Because we were so touched at Art Blocks when that came across our wires.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So Art Blocks has actually been really strong in encouraging and even kind of requiring at one point, but mostly encouraging all the artists to give a percentage of the revenues to charity for every project that's dropped. Art Blocks also does their own thing there. I think there's a carbon offset for every time there's a project drop. And so that was a big component. It was in the eccentrics drops. And, those sold pretty well, and there was a good chunk there to give to charity. And so I set up actually a foundation called the Radix Earth Foundation. And then we gave a pretty large gift to the Save the Redwoods League, kind of for the local, the trees, the sequoias, all the rest. Great organization, been around since 1919, I think. It was one of the very first environmental charitable organizations in the U.S. Back when they had discovered the sequoia forest and were starting to fell them for lumber. And a bunch of people got together and said, no, not those trees. So still a great group. And so we were able to do a good donation there. And recently they thanked us by dedicating a redwood grove that we named Art Blocks Grove up in Sonoma. So there's actually a bench there with our names on it in the Art Blocks Grove. So if you're ever up near Occidental, you can stop on in and hang out. There's a picnic area and stuff like that. So
Yeah. Well, on behalf of us at Art Blocks, thank you. And on behalf of the trees, thank you. And those people who like clean oxygen and all that. Right. So yeah. Thank you very much for that. That's wonderful. Yeah. All right. And it's a delight to talk to Carolina in this context. I've known her for a little while, and maybe she can say as much or as little about that as she wants, but to be able to introduce her as an artist here and see her work is phenomenal. So let's just turn it over to you and talk a little bit about your background in generative art and what it means to you and how it's informing your practice.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, my name is Carolina de Bartolo, and I'm just getting started in this area. So if there's anybody in the audience that's a beginner in, making art for the blockchain technologies, Web3, be encouraged by what's going on in my life. I had a 30+ year career as a designer and a creative director, design educator. Some of my former students are here. And very appreciative of those people who were my former students who showed up today. But so I was kind of a typography lady. I wrote a book on typography called Explorations in Typography. And I used to work at Art Blocks as their director of design and did their rebrands, both the Art Blocks rebrand and the Art Blocks engine rebrand. And a few confluence of events happened, one of which was that my mother got sick, and the other one was that I lost my job at Art Blocks, and I started using Midjourney. I had already been using Midjourney to make images, and while sort of sitting visual with my mother, I just was making more and more and more images. There was nothing else to do. I only had my phone. She would wake up and go to sleep and stuff, and so I made a lot of images. I started posting them on social media, and then I was lucky enough to apply to the VCA artist residency, and I am currently one of in their 6th cohort of the VCA artist residency. And so I'm just feel very lucky to be able to make more personal artworks. I have a traditional training in design, but I went to school in, if you can believe it, I went to school in the 1980s. And I had a very traditional training in graphic design, but my first year of college was basically an art background. We took literally 9 hours worth of drawing per week in freshman year, and I took painting classes and printmaking classes, and I always wanted to do my own artwork my whole life after I left college, but I never had an apartment where I wanted to make a mess also. So I never really had a studio. So, Midjourney was so perfect because I could do it anywhere. I could do it in a hospital room or, a care facility room, waiting for my mom to wake up or, so there's just this weird confluence of events, and I just had this opportunity to make a lot of art, and now I'm in this residency, and now I feel a little bit justified in calling myself an artist today, but I didn't feel that way not that long ago, that I felt only that I could call myself a designer. So this series that you see there, I call it LA Land. The interesting thing that's happening with Midjourney now is that you can, besides prompt-based commands that you can put into Midjourney, you can also feed it your own images. So prior to my mom getting sick, I had already made like 5,000 images in Midjourney. And so I started feeding Midjourney to ask it to make a blend of multiples of my images. And then I also started looking back in my old photography of my just things I had taken photographs of. And we took a number of trips for Art Blocks to Marfa, Texas. And I had some images from Marfa that were really inspiring to me. And I started to realize how much Marfa is like such a special place and that it was so inspiring to be there. And so I had, these guys have been to Marfa as well. Everybody here has been to Marfa. There's kind of a little Art Blocks thing going on up here, even though I'm an excommunicated Art Block. But in any case, I found some images of like urban landscapes, and I started feeding the urban landscapes into Midjourney, and then layered them in these kind of double exposures and made duotones and so forth. And most of my work has a quality of being kind of vintage. Since I do have this traditional training, I'm trying to use this very new tool to make something that looks indistinguishable from something that was made by more traditional means. Because that's sort of just where my taste level lives, and I'm old, so why not make something old? I also think that I used to always tell the students, you have basically two options, right? You can do something old in a new way, or you can do something new in an old way. And I think I'm just doing, you can also do something new in a new way, but you might be living in your own little bubble, right? If you do that, right? So the idea is to connect to something that has come before. So I think this new technology just allows you to do something old in a new way, I think. And so that's what interests me, is like something like this, where it kind of looks like it could be a photography or a double exposed photography or what did you call it? You called it something, I thought maybe. Acetates.
I don't, I can't remember half the stuff I say.
Yeah. So anyway, people see a lot of things in it. I also, one of my favorite artists, hopefully you guys might have heard of this person, Giorgio de Chirico. I'm not sure how you pronounce it exactly. I think it's de Chirico. But in any case, he had these kind of urban spaces with no people. And I just remember so many times always waiting for the person that's walking down the street to get out of the way so I can get a great shot with like just the architecture and the little bits of, nature and stuff. So the other thing about my work is that it's really eclectic because, I'm using Midjourney. So like one day I do watercolors and the next day you can go to the next slide. The next day I do these kind of fictitious botanical drawings, So one of the recurring subject matters that I've been doing is dandelions. And I remember being in that freshman drawing class, 1984, 1985 maybe, and drawing dandelions. And, it's just been something I've been, attracted to for a long time. And, of course, the dandelion is a little bit like the plant version of a cocoon and a butterfly, right? It's like it transforms, and so I think that it's kind of interesting too that this subject matter kind of came up at this time in my life when I'm also kind of transforming for myself too. So anyway, these are also remixes of my own images that I made, more traditional kind of vintage photography of dandelions, and then I kind of remixed them. So those are the latest ones. And also I've partnered, or I was accepted to be an artist on this platform called Art Fora. And so what I really think that, unlike these digitally native, algorithmic, long-form generative art projects that Radix and Marty talked about, this kind of work to me doesn't really belong on a screen. Like if you wanted to display it in your home or something, or in a other location, like here at House of Web3, that to me, something like that, it should be printed, because it is, like I say, supposed to be referencing something that is more traditional. So if you go to my room, I did print out some of my other older vintage things, printed and framed, kind of finished artworks. So you can see those. But the LA Land ones are, I think that's appropriate for a screen, actually. It looks more like a screen. And next one. And so should be a little movie playing soon. There we go. So as a little kind of commemorative item this evening, I made this little series of Ace of Hearts, hearts for San Francisco, and then Ace for like the best, number one, something like that. So it's now minting. It's just released at 5 o'clock today on Foundation. So if you want to get a mint, you can do the QR code. 50% of the proceeds are going to go back to this event that Lisa has so graciously put together for us. So it's over there on Foundation, and you can get a little Ace of Hearts for yourself. I think the next one is also about or maybe the movie's still playing, but there's 101 of them for the 101 highway, and I called my business 101 editions too for that reason. But it's also 101 is going back to binary code, zeros and ones. So
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for and thank you for this this project. So yay! Thank you, Carolina. Do you have another slide, or is that? Oh, there's this. Sorry. Okay.
just to let you know that you're on the right at the right place if it looks like that, if you're minting.
All right. Wonderful. Well, I think we have another couple minutes. Does anybody have any questions for any of our panelists or for myself for the first half here?
When you have the art that you create that doesn't match to your visualization or imagination, how do you console yourself?
No. I mean, I think it matches, but it's like seeing your child for the first time or something. You don't know exactly. I spent going back. I think that project started in 2015. I made my first piece of quote generative art in 2008. I sold my first piece of generative art in 2022. It's a long time to be making art with nobody cares. You know what I mean? No one's checking anything. And so it's a little emotionally overwhelming to kind of see this thing happen, regardless of financial success or whatever happened, or unsuccess, if that's a word. But you feel connected to that art and that color in a way that I just think it's just for me at least, it was hard to appreciate it. I needed time away. And then I think to your point, I'd never been on a Block Talk before. Somebody started sending me stuff. I'm looking at what people are talking about my art. It's crazy. You get all worked up. And then I think you kind of learn I like that some people don't like it. I like that not everybody likes it, or I don't like this one. I don't like number 12 or whatever it is, and so I think you kind of learn to have this little friendship with your piece of art. But I think I would bet all artists or people who create anything have a hard time. At least I've heard that a lot. And I think for me it's true. Don't even want to look at it for a little bit. It's a little too hard.
The funny thing is, and you probably had this happen too, is that sometimes there's one that you don't like as the artist and it came out and somebody minted it, but somebody else out there loves it. And it's the best one ever. Grail,
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, okay, sure. The one with the one little circle over here. Yeah. All right, dude, it's yours. So, yeah.
It happened to me too. I was, my brother was like, "Oh, I want to get some of your artwork. Here's the ones that I like." And I was like, "No, I'm not giving you any of those. I'm not going to do that. I don't like any of those."
Software. I heard you mention the Journey. I heard you mention ActionScript. What other software are you using within these? How do you ActionScript?
Yeah, JavaScript primarily these days.
Processing or
P5 JS for some of them. My latest ones are just pure JavaScript, but yeah, P5 is processing on JavaScript, and that one is by far the most popular tool set out there.
I like to use software like he's saying though. I use RoboFont and things like that in my work because I think it's interesting to start outside of code and then, okay, I've done this thing with variable fonts and glyphs or RoboFont or some other esoteric design software. You're not going to see that show up in a lot of other algorithms or a lot of other people's work. And so I think I love design software. I think it's all so fun. And so starting with some of those pieces and working backwards is fun too. Yeah.
Hi, question for Rob. So you had your the piece that was like a million circles, and are those circles flourish rock? So you're doing something old in the new way.
In some ways, yeah. And so with the wind woven one, they're actually just the outline of the circle. And so that's how the fuzzy texture is coming out. So they're not filled. And there have been some really good ones, some really good pieces out there already, generative pieces that use the very small circles with very small squares. And to great effect. And so this time I had tried it with, I had done it with the closed circles, the filled circles for a project called The Spring Begins with the First Rainstorm by Cole Sternberg that I worked on. And so we've done some great kind of cloud effects with the closed circles, like millions of them. And so I just one day said, well, what if I didn't fill those circles? And oh, it's fuzzy. How cool. If you get to a certain point and again, kind of close up that design space, that output space to kind of where you want that to be. But yeah, the whole thing in a new way.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Yeah. And you mentioned
Many years of teaching.
Yeah, you mentioned Seurat there too, who's a French post-impressionist painter from the 19th century, and he's somebody that comes up in a lot of conversations with artists that are working in the space. Actually, not only because it's sort of he is famous for a pointillistic technique, which in some ways kind of predicts or presages pixelation, right? It's like the making a composite image of a lot of small pieces. But it also, art historically, fits into a moment where painting, which was the dominant image-making technology, all until the middle of the 19th century, was encountering photography, which is the new technology. And painting had to kind of wrap itself around what its tasks were and how technology and artists would use technology in a productive way. So I think we're at a similar historical moment. We're at an early moment with blockchain and generative art that is happening, that is really the use of new technologies that artists who maybe do work for clients in other parts of their identity are using it in non-instrumentalized ways to experiment, to find new art ideas. And I think that's really part of the promise of Web3 and generative art in this context. And it absolutely lines up with historical debates in painting and its encounter with other new image-making technologies. So I know that we're meant to wrap up this first part, but does somebody have a very basic question? Does somebody come in here knowing nothing about any of the words that we've used, who wants us to define something very basic and get applauded for asking the question that everybody is thinking? Yeah.
Well, I'm curious of your definition of generative art.
My definition of generative art, wonderful. Well, so one of the first words that came out of Marty's mouth was about systems and about limits. And so I think that's really what we're talking about is instruction-based art, that you have an artist sets up the parameters of a system. They could be as very simple or they could be very complicated. And then something comes into that system that generates an output. So that's how I think of it. I think of it's interchangeable almost. Now I'm being recorded. I don't know, but the word algorithm is in there somewhere, right? Okay, so it's there's a function that takes an input and generates an output.
And I think randomness is a huge component.
Yeah, it's math, but it's not. I mean, I use that word. I just dropped the word non-instrumentalized, but it uses math kind of against math in a way. I mean, it uses math to aesthetic purposes, to artistic purposes, not to getting something done the way a tool gets something done, but to leading us to a new thought or a new thing to look at. Yep.
Someone looking to step out of the system community or the traditional tools, what tools are out there for someone who wants to tinker with their own algorithms to create their own custom outputs? Someone who wants to tinker.
Yes. Well, now we're going to land right at your feet because you introduced yourself as a beginner, which I don't believe, but a beginner. How would you answer that question?
Well, no, you were asking about what tools to use to tinker. I mean, well, you could use Midjourney, of course, but these guys know more about P5JS. Custom tools. Well, there are, as far as what I was talking about with blending images, there's these GAN networks, but I mean, I still think you make them on a platform, right? Where you can sort of you can kind of train a machine learning model on your own images and so forth. I mean, that would be my next step, maybe to try something like that. But nevertheless, I don't know that you really get away from making, I don't know, you guys say, what do you think?
You're talking for the AI kind Yeah, so there are ones out, I don't know the names, but there are ones out there where you could, say, drop 200 images in there. And it will learn training it basically from that. And then you're saying, okay, this one needs this, and you give me keywords like that for those images. And now you kind of define your style with that. And then, okay, now you're saying, okay, now give me a portrait of a dog, riding on a motorcycle. And then it will do that in your style now because you trained it on the style. So, but there are some tools that let you kind of have to run it on your own machine. I think Stable Diffusion is one that lets you do that. As opposed to Midjourney, which really is pretty much always you're sending it out to their servers.
You're asking me. I like I say with the blend command, I think that you, as far as I can tell, you're not actually you're using your own images, and it can be, I think, up to maybe 4 or 5 images. So I've mainly done it with 2 images, because once you get into 3 and 4 and 5 images, they start to get into just a mess. Probably, I don't know. I mean, that'd be the next step. I mean, I have my life's work, already laid out for me here. The rest of my life's work, just as far as all the images that you can possibly make and all the combinations you can possibly make. And, the more images you make, the more you say, well, how about if I took that now and combined with this? And the other thing that I do is I make what's called, what I call, I shouldn't say what's called, what I call a radical. So if anybody's familiar with Chinese language, they have, parts of each character is called a radical, right? So that's how people who know how to write Chinese characters can remember how to write them, because they're not all different. There's actually little pieces that are the same, they're little radicals inside. And so sometimes I use Midjourney just to make radicals that I know these are not finished works. These are going to be just the parts that I'm going to then blend later, so I work a lot on making like the radicals as well.
Wonderful. Yeah, one question in the back. Maybe this will be the last one. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, wonderful. Yeah. Okay. So the question for those of you who didn't hear is, what's the difference between generative and generated art as 2 terms as they relate to work that is on-chain and work that has off-chain assets? You guys want to take a stab?
Well, I mean, for the Art Blocks model, of course, that is called generative and it's code-based. So in Art Blocks model, what's actually getting stored on the blockchain is not the final output. It's the code that will generate the final output. And it's the same piece of code for all 195, all 1,000 pieces, whatever the collection is. What's then stored for each individual piece is the one hash, the random value basically that goes into that as the main input. So in fact, when you're buying an Art Blocks piece, you're buying that hash really. And it just happens to, when it's put through that one collection, it makes this great output. And that's now yours. Generated, I think, would be more of the curated after the fact. Like the images are created by the artist, and however the artist is doing it. And then they're stored not necessarily on the blockchain, maybe on a blockchain-based file system. But still, that's really more about tying it in with metadata and things like that to the actual image. And so what you're buying is ownership of that image, which hopefully will never change, but in theory could at some point. So it's a little bit different that way. And it is a great thing to, and there are some images that have been encoded on the blockchain, just the images themselves, but they tend to be smaller and lower resolution. So it's good to know.
And there are some people who are intentionally putting images those that will change, right? That's the idea of it, is that it will change over time, right? So that's kind of an interesting, something new in a new way, I guess. Like whether anybody wants their image to like eventually turn into something else when that's what the image they wanted to buy. But I don't know. So, these are all questions, but
Yeah, we're all exploring and we'll see where it goes, I guess. Anyway, well, making artwork can be such a private thing and so heartfelt. So I know it can feel like you're getting put on the spot to come out and speak about your work. So if everybody could just thank us for their generosity, to Carolina and Rob and Marty for talking about their work today. All right, so let's take like 2 or 3 minute break if you want to stretch or grab a thing and come back, and we'll reconvene for the second half of our event. All right, thanks folks.
So I'm an artist. This is one take, and it's straight in the camera. And then I've created these backwards. This is using a technique called equilibrium, where the black is the same grayscale as the petals. The petals have been scanned, and they're Mercier petals. But they've been put in random generators with Photoshop, and the colors are slightly different. It'll vary the colors, so bright to dark, so it moves away from that equilibrinescence, and it's psychologically for your eyes your eyes are not able to distinguish boundaries, and so it moves around. It's hard to see on this screen because it's small, but anyway, I'm a member of the Berkeley Chamber of Commerce, and I also the blockchain community. And I'd like to share that this. Yeah. Is that something like you involved in?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I mean, we're always interested in meeting new people that are into this. So let's talk. Can I give you one of my cards?
Yes.
Okay. This is Caroline. Give me that one. And then, yeah, we can. It's just great to put a name to a face.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. Okay, great. All right. There you go. As an artist, on stage, play with your art. This is all spontaneous. We can just have 2 chairs up here, maybe. Yeah.
It got sort of late. Yeah, it got sort of late. So, all right, a little bit.
everybody. We're going to get started. If you want to find your seats. So we're being mindful of everyone's time. So if you want to come sit down, we're going to start the second half of our evening here. All right, so I've got my cookies on board. Got some sugar in the system, got some water. We're ready to go.
Excellent. Let's do
Okay,
it.
good. So this is a moment in which we're going to get to know each other in real time before an audience. Because one of the fun things about Web3 space is that you can sometimes know people by their pseudonyms or by their screen names, and then you get in real life and you have a whole nother dimension of a relationship to have. So we're going to get to know each other through this interview format. This is Han, known as bonafidehan, who you might know by his screen name. And he's here today to talk about an initiative called Deca, a company that he's running, a platform, and also to talk about his life as a collector and some indicative works in his collection. So he's been generous enough to say that he also would entertain questions, maybe towards the end, but I'm imagining just a really informal conversation that we're going to have about what he's been up to and how it relates to generative art in this space. So welcome.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. Do you want to kick it off just by introducing yourself in the manner and tone that you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, of course. So I noticed the really cool art block stickers and things. So I put my decal, which is the Deca symbol. So I'm the founder of Deca. And then other things that I do in the NFT space, I'm part of 6529 Capital. And then I a hobby art collector in the space, and certainly by no means anything compared to these artists who have spent 14 years not selling a work for 14 years. I mean that is truly something to admire. I am a small collector, yeah. So those are some of the things I do, and it's going to be exciting to just talk about some stuff with you.
Great. Yeah. So we asked you to put up some slides just to introduce us to Deca and what Deca is. For those who don't know, give us a little introduction, please.
Yeah. So Deca is a pretty cool place. It's a community of people who just love the art that's being created, and we've created both a platform and a place for people to hang out. So here you can kind of see two galleries that have been created in Deca, and that is one of the things that you can do in Deca. On the left, you see what's called a freestyle gallery, and you as a collector or an admirer of art can create a gallery that has all the art that you admire, put it down, and it gives you a different kind of context and a way to admire the art that's been created. And on the right is Grant, who is one of the artists in the space. And he's pretty famous. I mean, of course, famous for his art, of course, but also famous for creating these kind of juxtaposition galleries. Well, he'll take his art and then put often something generative art, next to it to kind of give additional context to his art and the other generative art. And I think they're marvelous. So Deca is this is one of the ways that you can use Deca. And then if you go to the next slide, two artists that you may be familiar with. So Radix, I always thought you were Radix. Yeah, I came from computer science, so it was Radix sort. But Radix, there's these artist profiles, and they're pretty cool. You can look at all of the art that's been created by that artist in a single view. You don't have to go search on every single platform. You don't have to go looking at the all these links. Visit the page, see all of the art that's been created by the artist in one single go. And this has been something I've as a collector really wanted. So we built it. And if you don't go to the next slide, but imagine if you went down, you scroll down, you click on a collection, you can see in a really fast way. It's a very fast, well, I'm sure I just jinxed it, but usually it is a fast website. And if you look at a collection, it's pretty fast. You can also do, you know, shrink it down, make it bigger, and the Love Tennis Art project, for example, you can scroll it really quickly by looking at it in a compressed way. It's a pretty decent experience. So it's a good way to get introduced to the artist, follow the artist. We have a couple new features that are coming out, and you definitely want to follow the artist for that. So those are some of the things that Deca does.
Yeah, and I would also just say we were talking about generative art is the overall sort of frame of this. Part of understanding what the artist's intention is seeing multiple outputs. So being able to call a project up and see a whole kind of grid of them is another way in to experience the work on a more structural level, maybe than just on an I like this individual output type level. So that's also something that apparently, this obviously affords this way. And can you talk, so when people talk about like setting up a new platform, I mean, you referenced this just there. You say like, this is something that I wanted to see. Like, can we talk a little bit about like what problems this solves? Maybe just I'll leave it at that.
Totally. So, so a little bit about my background coming into this space. So I liked beautiful things, but I wasn't like an art collector, right? And I still don't think of myself as an art collector, but but I entered the space by collecting a bunch of the art that was created, especially in art blocks. And I mean, really, art blocks is kind of the foundation of a lot of the things that the entire space has been built on top of. And so I came into the space as a collector, and the space is new. It's a very new space. And I mean, the 721
Protocol.
Sorry? Right, so ERC 721, the proposal came out in 2020, I believe, 2021. I mean, it's a new movement. So I came into the space as a collector, and I found a lot of warts and things that I wanted to fix. Starting with a way to have a gallery, a freestyle gallery that would unbind me from all of these ways that you can only show in a single row, and I wanted to have a freestyle gallery, so we built a freestyle gallery, and that's what we started with. I wanted to have all the art that I collected, all the art that I really enjoyed, I wanted to see it on my phone. So we built an app. We haven't really focused on the app. The app's kind of broken, so we're working on other things. Other things that are a little bit better than the app. But yeah, that's how we started. Then recently we built the artist profiles, because I personally got tired of clicking through all 20 links on a link tree on every single artist profile. Usually I got lost after the third link and trying to figure out which link I'd clicked and not clicked. And so I wanted a single artist profile. And a lot of these artists are my friends too. So it's like, hey, what do you want us to build? And they're like, build us this thing. I was like, let's do it. And so that's how we got to build this thing. And honestly, a lot of the platforms out there are slow. Let's say one of the things that we really wanted to focus on was, at least for the artist profile and the experience that you have on it, super fast. Not as fast as I want it yet, but much faster than many of the other platforms that you see. And so an art first platform that really focuses on artists and being able to see their art, experience it. The way that I kind of think about Deca is like, we're building out the infrastructure for us to experience digital objects. If you're new to the space, the really cool thing about the concept of an NFT, and I've talked about this before, but I'll do it again, is so it's the first time in history we as a civilization have created digital objects that are the property of object permanence. So what is object permanence? It's the idea, so take this table, take this steel beam or whatever it's made of. It's a property of the physical world, and we take it for granted that as long as the thing doesn't corrode, it's not destroyed, 100 years later, it will still be there. And that's the property of physics. These atoms don't get destroyed, and they're here. Digital objects, they did not have this property until recently. And it's only through the physics of decentralization that we have digital objects that have object permanence. That's crazy, actually. I mean, for me, that's crazy. And the fact that these objects are Turing complete and you can do anything with them, which means that you can build anything and everything. So we are just scratching the surface of what these things are. All the things that you think about the domain name, right? Amazon.com. That's a pre-NFT NFT. That itself is built on a decentralization system, custom built for the internet. But the concept of the NFT makes a generalized system that enables you to create anything like a domain name, and that'll just be one sliver of it. So we're going to be creating this mirror world of digital objects that do everything, and it's going to be as big and interesting as the physical world. So the way that I think about Deca is that we think about Deca as the infrastructure to experience these digital objects. So with physical objects, we have been through evolution with hundreds of millions of years of evolution, have capabilities to sense the physical world. With these digital objects, they are right now immaterial. And so we're going to build out the infrastructure for experiencing them. And that's the way we kind of think about our mission.
You got me convinced.
Cool.
Thank
you.
I would just note here that, I come from a background in history, so I always try to locate these things in cycles of history that we understand or to help me understand. And I think of, art is almost always been the leading edge of something new that then has unforeseen applications, because artists are experimenting, and again, goes back to the non-instrumentalized aspect. There are ways in which artists can try new things without a client or without a necessary useful purpose that enables us to learn about being in the world in new ways. And I think when you're talking about this, I'm not at all surprised that the first use case is to try to figure out how best to present natively digital artworks. And but I can see when I hear you talk, and I become more and more convinced that this has eventual applications that really maybe can have nothing to do with art. But art is the first use case for this, I guess.
Oh, it is. It is going to be a remarkable use case.
Yes.
And I think we sometimes, as a society, downplay art, as in it's something that's that's not useful or something like that. But to them, I always tell them, really, art and what I call these cultural objects they are sometimes the only things that last after civilization dies. The art that's been produced by a society, that's often the last remnant of that society. And so to those who question whether art is just a simple application of this thing, I think it's a marvelous application. The thing that's also really cool about this whole thing is that these digital objects, they're also eternal. As long as the blockchain exists, they are eternal objects, which is insane, because we have always tried to create eternal things. Whether it's governments, whether it's nations, corporations, families, lineage, etc. We've always strived for the eternal, and this thing has created it. So being able to create art that's eternal, that will survive, us, maybe even the countries we live in. I think it's really cool.
Wow, and that eternal aspect actually links back to the question about the difference between generative and generated that came up earlier, and if I just want to maybe try to close that loop. So what Rob was saying about the code being on chain and the hash being the thing that can always call the code up, that is very crucial to the idea of it being immutable, not changeable, and eternal, because as long as the blockchain exists, that thing and the software exists to interpret the thing that's on the blockchain, you will get the artwork, you will see the output, it will be recalled. Whereas something that's generated that has an NFT that points to it that's somewhere else is only there as long as that person wants to host that thing. And when that company goes out of business, or that person gets sick of paying their utility bills, or they unplug their computer, you have the deed to a house that doesn't exist. And so that is the difference between something that's on chain and generated that participates in this conversation about forever and about immutability, that I think is the most exciting part of the space, speaking from my seat. All right, did you bring, what do we have next? We have this. Does this tell us to do something?
I wanted to introduce the Decagon as an example. So if you play the video.
I didn't do that, but it did. Okay,
very cool.
thank you.
Thank you. So the Decagon is a piece of art created by Guled. I'm sure you know Guled from, many of you may know Guled from Archetypes. So if you could play it again and pause it at there. Thank you. So that image, oh, by the way, just a token detail page of a token. So that is a piece of art. What's interesting about this is that the art evolves. So it's not that you had a piece of art and it never changes. We have a concept of like what we call a DXP. It's like an XP thing. It's like a point. You can earn points inside of the system, and you just have fun with it by doing little quizzes on art, which is I think pretty cool. But you earn these points, and you can apply it to this NFT, and the NFT grows. So if you could press play again. And then pause it. Oh, okay. Go back a little bit. Pause. Thank you. So that NFT that you see in the background, so that's the NFT that grew up out of this initial very simple NFT. So what's cool about this concept of the Decagon is that, a lot of the art that is being created, they're non-interactive, or they don't grow, or they're static. As I mentioned before, the concept of the NFT, the remarkable thing about that is that it's Turing complete. So it just means in computer science that it's written in a programming language that can basically do anything. And here it's an example of an NFT that can grow. So you can, just like a Tamagotchi, that I'm sure I'm dating myself, but just like a Tamagotchi, you can kind of grow the thing, and it's like a little piece of art that you own that you grow it, and you don't actually know what it's going to turn into, which is the other cool part. And so yeah, if you want to try minting a Decagon, you can go to deca.art/Decagon and mint it. And then grow it. So it's pretty cool. I ended up owning like 80 of these. They're just so fun.
Cool. And let's see what this next one is. Okay. So maybe now I'm switching gears a little bit to talking about your life as a collector. Just, you say I'm not an art collector, but I'm going to say I call that art, and if you own it, you collect it. So we call you an art collector.
That's fair. That's fair.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about your journey in collecting this kind of art, and what has most interested you, and maybe even how to get started for people who, you know, are coming in and maybe getting their first piece next week, or yeah. Tell us a little bit about your story as a collector.
Yeah, absolutely. So I entered the space as a hobbyist, and somebody told me, "Hey, go look at this thing called NFTs," and I was like, "What are NFTs?" And they said, "Just go look at some stuff." And they told me to look at a punk, and punks at that time were not as expensive they are now. And I was like, "Okay, I'll just buy a punk," because like the best way to learn something is just own it and just start doing stuff with it. And the first thing you could do with an NFT is of course buy it. So bought a punk, bought an ape, and then I discovered something called art blocks.
Before you did that, you bought cryptocurrency though.
Ah, yes, I did.
How did you do that? When did you set up your wallet? How did you know about that?
So so I was a casual owner of crypto pretty early on. But I never really got into crypto, and that's the funny thing. This story is kind of a template of a lot of stories of people who got into crypto. They got pulled into crypto. Somebody said crypto's cool. Okay, cool. I just bought some coins, etc., and I just sat in Coinbase for like 5 years or something. That's usually how it turns out. And then, hey, you know, I got into NFTs, and that's when I got really into crypto. And so that was the exact same thing. I just had a couple of stuff, and I forgot about it. I mean, price went up, etc., but kind of boring. And then I got into NFTs, and that's the when I got really exciting. Yeah. And then so with art blocks, it was I'm sure you've seen DC Investor, a very prolific tweeting guy. I don't know how he has time for anything else but tweeting, but he tweets a lot. And he mentioned, hey, go look at this thing called Fidenza. And that was like 3 days or 2 days after mint of the Fidenza series. So I went and looked at Fidenza, and I liked it. So it's also kind of very addictive, you know. I bought one, I bought another one, and I just kept going until at that time I owned 56 of them. So I bought 56 Fidenzas in the beginning, and I just fell in love with how I could create sets of them. So I actually have a set of these what are called micros, and they're green micros, and there's only 4 of them in the entire collection of 999, and I labeled it wind through grass. And when you print it at 40 by 48 inches and put 4 of them side by side, they actually look like you actually feel the wind going through the grass. And so that's how I got into collecting by creating sets of Fidenzas, and yeah.
Yeah, so this is really interesting because you're describing coming to it after the project has minted already. So this is there's a moment there where you see everything that the algorithm can release. Like the algorithm has been written, it's been loaded on chain, the algorithm has been seeded 999 times. It's created 999 individual outputs that the artist could not imagine ahead of time, that the collector could not imagine ahead of time. And then in that kind of 1 day, 2 day period right after that, there's usually a rash of turnover of ownership of those things as people begin to understand what the algorithm has done. The artists can see it for the first time and the collectors can see it for the first time, and they can start to sort of manifest their own sensibility by, I would say, cherry picking works that have minted out. And so what you're describing is you went into this with this lens of I like micro, you identified traits that you liked and were able to go into the secondary market and then assemble a collection based on those. Is there an image of that or no, this is a different project, but
there isn't. Yeah.
I would just say that it's not just the minting that's the fun part. I mean, part of it is also like going back and, you know, seeing what the algorithm has wrought and making collections for yourself of that. And I want to ask this question, the resident dumb question. Okay, so dumb questioner. So in Deca, you don't have to own those works to put them in the gallery, right?
That's correct.
Okay, right. So you could essentially curate your own collection of works that you don't even need to own just to be able to see them and enjoy them in that way, right?
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons that we started with building that kind of gallery, is because people wanted to kind of lay out, their ideal collection or ways to compare, I love, I love fermented fruit, and you would, put it side by side, describe all the traits and like explore it, and you become a curator. So like a lot of the functions of what we call like trad art, we kind of just replicated it, sometimes without even knowing about it.
And definitely without permission.
Definitely without permission, which is the best part. And so we didn't ascribe these like very very fundamental things. Like we never called ourselves curators, but essentially that's what we're doing. And a lot of the market clearing functions of a gallerist, or the go-to-market engine of basically selling the art, a lot of us became art dealers. So, for example, like right after I bought like 56 Fidenzas, for about a month or two, for about 2 to 3 months, I became like the guy who sold Fidenzas. So if you wanted to buy a Fidenza or if you wanted to sell a Fidenza, a lot of people just came to me, and I became like a central market clearing function. And so I moved quite a bit of inventory, and and of course for zero commission, but it was just like, it's fun. I want to help, and all these roles that you would have, and I'm the Guggenheim, and I'm the this gallery that sells this thing, and I'm a museum that canonizes art. All these categories that have been established, ever since the concept of the public museum. I forgot, there was some museum in England, and then the public museum, National Museum, that was first created. The Louvre. These roles and systems that have been created since the 1800s, we kind of recreated it in like 6 months, and we kind of just had a lot of fun. And the days of 2021, they're really fun. They're really fun.
Well, I say that as kind of a joke that you do it without permission, but I think that's actually an important part of this. I mean, part of the ethos of decentralization is actually about breaking down boundaries between specific roles and responsibilities. I think that a lot of what brings some of us to this space is the idea of not having to ask permission to be a curator, not having to ask permission to be a collector, not having to ask permission to be an art dealer, not having to ask permission to be an artist. All of these things are what this space affords, I think. And so I think that, we're in a time when the traditional art world is, I think, having to sort of like adjust in a certain sense. We're not quite there yet, but I think that what we're seeing in this space will actually go back and change that system in a certain point. And of course, one of the major attractions for artists of this space is the idea of not splitting 50% of your sale with your gallery, which is how the traditional art world functions. And most of these platforms have heavy majority of the proceeds going directly to the artist, and then also they can benefit from resale royalties if they're enforced. All right, so can I just go to the next slide? Because I see that we went from Fidenza, and then you went to another project of Tyler's.
Yes. One thing I just wanted to add to the permissionless. Yeah, I thank you also for like emphasizing these points, because I've been in the space long enough that I kind of like skip over a lot of stuff and directly go into terminology that I'm sure is very degen and stuff like that. And by the way, degen is for like degenerate.
There you go. Very nice. Well done.
But the permissionless part is really, I think, I really couldn't agree more with it. I think not even just the art portion, but all of crypto, like the revolutionary fire of crypto is like to invert centralized systems. Like our society is built on top of centralized systems, and usually they turn out to be opaque and eventually corrupt. And so the revolutionary fire in crypto is open everything up, make everything transparent, and nobody can be prevented from doing anything inside of the rules of the system. And so I think in some matter of time, I don't know what the time unit is, but in some matter of time, I think it will be often sometimes crazy. They will say, it's kind of crazy you guys relied on a piece of paper that said it did something and you just trusted that it did something, as opposed to a program or math that actually ensured that it did something. So I think as a society, we are in the transition period where these concepts are new, and it's only later, some amount of time passes, and everything, I think, will transition to this kind of system.
We're in the future. All right, great. Tell us about this.
By the way, I'm actually not trying to just focus on Tyler's works. It's just that I have a lot of them, so I was asked to pick 4 or 5 of them, and so I just picked one from each of the categories that I own. So that's why Tyler is 2 of the representative pieces of art. And I should really get back to collecting. I've really focused on Deca for the past year and a half. I should get back to collecting.
We'll welcome you back.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So IC, Incomplete Control, was the project that immediately followed Fidenza by Tyler Hobbs. And it was a really interesting project because a lot of the digital art that had been created until that moment, I surely shouldn't say all because I don't know if that's true, but a lot of the art that I had seen before that moment often tried to express digital perfectionism. So the way, and definitely take a look at some of Tyler's essays, he really kind of lays out in cogent written form a lot of the stuff that I'm kind of bumbling around, but much better to read his essays. But the fact that he created, so if I look at Fidenza, it's kind of like perfected digital abstraction, and not saying it's like the best, but it's just one kind of he tried to perfect digital these little shapes. The opposite of it was incomplete control. So they go in pairs. So incomplete control was this attempt to kind of make it as not controlled as possible. So he talks about how in digital art, you have you can create perfect things. You can create a perfect circle. You can create the perfect line. And the reality is that most of the physical processes that create art, they're all created with stochastic systems that have random distributions of how, let's say, a pigment is applied to the paper, how a line is drawn by a pencil. They're all stochastic systems that follow a distribution, and randomness of nature adds little imperfections. And so incomplete control was the digital representation of that. Instead of perfection, he tried to create in some rules set, create imperfection. And so let the control go and see what happens. And so it produces these pieces of art, very different from Fidenza. I think of Fidenza as like fruit, and I think of incomplete control as like wine. And often just as Caroline said, often, at least for IC, the best way to experience IC is to see it in person. So like, it's a 40 by 50 print. They're huge. And if you encase it in museum quality glass or museum quality often acrylic, it really is something to behold. And so it kind of looks like little scribbles. And of course they are scribbles, but really interesting to see when printed and in the right presentation format, something crazy.
And did he specify those output parameters of the size and how this should be framed, or were you in conversation with him about that?
These are all random. So it was a really cool event where like we all gathered in a single spot, minted it together physically, actually.
Yeah.
And it was really fun in New York.
Amazing. Okay, what's next?
So I just wanted to show another example of a decagon. This is like an example of a decagon that grows from just a simple template, just a 2D template, just little line drawings, and you keep feeding it DXP, and it grows into this like beautiful abstract kind of rendering. And they're really beautiful pieces. And a lot of the community members in Deca, they love to like grow the thing and see what it turns into. And some of them they're truly beautiful. And this is one of them that I really appreciate. Here's a what we call a decal. So the decal is our symbol, our logo for Deca. And we have this whole program where artists will create these decals in the rendition. So they'll render the decal. Lots of artists have done it. Familiar names like Xcopy, Grant, Gould's done one. Lots of artists that or if you're in the space, have done it, and they'll kind of like imagine it differently. This one is done by actually a team member in Deca, and it looks like a photograph, but it's not a photograph, and it has a decal. You can ignore the fake but rare. It's another degen terminology that'll take some time to describe. The space has the space is interesting. I think of crypto as like the crypto market and culture is like 10x faster than anything else I've seen, and especially in 2021, the NFT culture was at least like 5 times faster than crypto. And this culture, whenever you have this kind of like island of people that are tightly bound, they often create their own culture, and you create your own phrases and little pieces of language that are inside language that is used by the culture. That's what we mean by a lot of like degen things, and faker but rare is one of those idioms in our culture that I could explain it, but exactly, good more is another one. Yeah.
So sorry, if this is not a photograph, what are we looking at?
I think he modified it just using Photoshop, actually. So it's a photograph, but the decal was added.
I got it.
And then
Okay.
the fake but rare was added as well.
Very nice. Wonderful. Tell us about this.
So this is another example of an NFT that goes beyond an NFT. So this is a piece of art that we created in conjunction with Matt Kane. So the chain is a place where you can write anything. So when you look at a block, that block space, you compete for it, and there's a market for it, and that's what that's what gas is. The gas needed to be a part of that block. That block, you can write anything, right? So very famously, the first block, there were the words from the Times of London in 2008 or 2008, I believe. The exchequer of something says that banks are insolvent or something like that. Banks are insolvent, and then that was also a statement by, I think Satoshi wrote the first block, or he was part of writing it. So you can write anything in the block, and the words from the headline of someday in 2008 was written in the first block of Bitcoin. So we kind of took inspiration from that, and we said, why don't we create a system where you can write down any words and it'll be persisted and the words will be used to create art that's beautiful, and it could accompany the words. And so that's an example of an NFT that goes beyond an NFT that it's static, etc. It also evolves as you can create copies of it, and it evolves. So I just wanted to use that as an example.
Super cool. So it takes a textual prompt.
It takes in, so those words, the donut that started it all, that phrase, somebody wrote that down, and then they co-created it. So that was used as a seed, and from it, you can edit it and then say that you would like it. You persist it.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So are those our visuals?
That was it.
All right. Wonderful. Well, thank you for that presentation and for walking us through your journey as a collector. And yeah, I could monopolize this airtime all night, but I don't want to do that. So can we open up the floor if anybody has any questions or thoughts or comments? Please.
Yeah, I have a question. Well, first about the Ethereum blockchain, in one block we can put a 50 megabyte file, which could easily be enlarged to some version of a 5x6 high definition print, which is pretty amazing. That's some relevant permanence. And then for Deca, I'm interested in, is it meant to go in the direction of like a showcase for Android and iPhone?
So we are trying to create a lot of the infrastructure that you would like in the whole ecosystem. A gallery is one of the things that we're trying to do, it's a live system. You can go to Deca.art, sign up, create galleries, create an account, start following artists. I didn't completely understand the question about the block space.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, that was more a comment, but just the amazing ability of the, well, on the Ethereum blockchain, that you can have a 50 megabyte file, and that's the impermanence, that it's there forever. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes, and then in regards to the Android and the iPhone, is that, I mean, once Apple becomes more friendly to blockchain, cryptocurrency, then there is a way to have an easy gallery to show off either your own art or the art you collected. That sounds like that.
Oh yes, exactly. So we've built the gallery part, which was intended to kind of like be a way to like self-express like all the things that you want to do. We built the artist profile, and then the next thing that we'll build is this very slick collector profile, which will be coming pretty soon. So yes, exactly.
Yes.
You have mentioned like the story behind that one and how you had this connection, but I would ask of you like what was those decisions that you ended up with the name Deca, like straightforward, and not any different name, because, and again, kudos like for creating such a great platform for artists, but I would love to know the rationales.
Thank you, by the way. So Deca, this was a holdover name from a previous incarnation of a startup that I was doing. So I was building a startup that was completely unrelated to NFTs. And then I got into NFTs, and it turned out I was like spending no time on my startup and all the time on NFTs. And so I pivoted the startup, which was the only thing I could do at that point. So it was called Deca at that point because of the scientific prefix notation of 10. It's supposed to like 10x certain things. But it turned out to be a really good name because it's very short, memorable, has really hard consonants. And so, and not many companies used it. So I don't know why. I think it's a good name.
Great question. Anybody else? Yes.
Totally. So, so before I did Deca, I was definitely working at all the familiar names in technology, and all the things I'd learned carried over there. So certainly, performance is a end-to-end stack phenomenon. So if your database query sucks, then and you've laid out your data incorrectly, then it won't be fast, for example. Or if your image caching is bad, then your cache hit rate won't be good. So it's a holistic choice organizationally to say that we are going to optimize something that is sometimes invisible. So that is one of the choices I think you have to make as an organization. And then in terms of like the tech stack, yeah, we do the very standard things, Next.js, TypeScript, using MySQL related stuff. But it really is a fine-tuned focus organizationally to say that speed matters, and we're gonna slow the other things down in order to achieve speed, because speed has a cost. Not only in terms of just building it first time, but a maintenance cost. Because every single time you do something, all the metrics go down because it introduces another row, which corrupts the indexing performance, and you're like, oh, we got to do this again. And it means that it's going to slow down that feature development. So it certainly has to be something you choose to do, and you choose to do again and again for eternity. So but I will say that it is pretty fast, but there are things that we need to do that will make it even faster. And once we have that piece in place, I think it will actually be just like incredibly fast to the point where it's like, I don't know how you guys do it kind of thing. And that's where I want to get to. I can still see some points of stutter and certain infrastructure choices we have made that don't get there. So stay tuned. Soon it'll be faster. So, certainly speed of light plus some epsilon. So like the RTT between the client to the server times 2, plus some epsilon for like, servers responding, etc.
Oh my God, I've never heard that sentence before. So what's amazing about this is that we're having specialist conversations are coming together between science and art in the interdisciplinary workspace here, friendly space that welcomes all. I have no idea what you just said, but it sounds awesome. So anyway, thank you all for coming. Maybe I'll hand it over to Lisa just to wrap it up tonight. But thank you, Han, for your generosity. All right.
Thank you, Jordan, and thank you, Han, and thank you for Deca. I just had to also say, I absolutely love it. And for me to be able to collect a decagon, and you all can go on the platform and collect one I was admiring that artist forever, and I was priced out. And so it's so accessible, it's so amazing, and it's so fun to upgrade your decagon. So definitely get on there. And then plus as a collector, to be able to view everything, and then the artist profiles. I've heard artists just rave about how great it is to be able to view all of their collections in one. So anyway, just wanted to shout out Deca. And thank you for being here. And thank you, Jordan. Amazing talk tonight, and all of the artists, Martin, Rob, and Carolina. And then we also have exhibiting artists that, again, I want you to check out. Check out the guide and all the different rooms. We have Santiago and Jeff Palmer and Johan, as well as we have some resident artists that are also on display: Sandchuck, Kyle Gordon, Stephen Wallace, Superfray, and Pixel Activist. And then also Paul Rossoni is an artist whose physical art is all over the space and collection. So definitely check that out. And I wanted to thank our sponsor again for Clars for sponsoring the evening, and then also the House of Web3. This is an awesome event, and thank you all for coming. Check out the interactive stations in the front, collect a POAP. Thank you.